A dog races into a stormy night, dragging a tiny, shivering kitten back to safety. But this isn't just a rescue. It's the beginning of a story that will uncover buried secrets, stir painful memories, and leave everyone speechless. Why did the dog risk everything? What was hidden beneath the porch that changes everything? And how will this kitten transform a grieving woman's life forever? Don't miss this unforgettable tale of love, loss, and redemption that proves even the smallest lives can bring the biggest miracles. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The autumn rain tapped against the windows like gentle fingers, creating a soothing rhythm that filled June Holloway's living room. She sank deeper into her worn leather armchair, drawing comfort from its familiar embrace. The dancing flames in the fireplace cast warm shadows across the room, illuminating the collection of framed photos on the mantel, memories of happier times with Tom, her late husband. The soft glow caught the silver edges of their wedding photo, making it shimmer in the firelight. June adjusted her reading glasses and turned another page of her well-worn Agatha Christie novel. At her feet, Finn, her aging collie, dozed peacefully, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. His gray-flecked muzzle twitched occasionally in his sleep, and his paws moved slightly as if chasing something in his dreams. "Just like old times, isn't it, boy?" June murmured, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. The steam from her chamomile tea curled upward, carrying its gentle floral scent through the air. The familiar aroma reminded her of countless quiet evenings spent just like this, finding solace in the simple companionship. A sudden crack of thunder shattered the peaceful scene, rattling the window panes. Finn's head shot up, his ears instantly alert. He let out a sharp bark that made June jump, nearly spilling her tea onto her favorite blue cardigan. "It's just thunder, Finn," she said soothingly. But Finn wasn't listening. He paced back and forth between June and the back door, barking with increasing urgency. His nails clicked against the hardwood floors as he moved, his tail straight and rigid with concern. "What's gotten into you?" June set down her book and tea, watching as Finn grew more agitated. He whined, pawing at the door, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity she hadn't seen in years. His whole body trembled with nervous energy. Sighing, June pushed herself up from her chair. All right. She grabbed her yellow raincoat from the hook by the door and picked up the flashlight from the side table. The moment she opened the door, Finn bolted into the darkness, disappearing into the sheets of rain. "Finn, come back," June called out, hesitating at the threshold. The rain pelted down in heavy sheets, and the wind whipped her coat around her legs. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out into the storm, feeling the immediate chill of raindrops on her face. Her flashlight beam bounced across the wet grass as she followed Finn's barking. The ground was slick beneath her feet, and she gasped as she lost her footing for a moment. Her hand shot out to steady herself against a nearby tree trunk as she regained her balance, its rough bark wet beneath her fingers. "Finn, where are you?" she called out, pushing her wet hair from her face. She found him at the edge of the property, near the line of oak trees that marked the boundary. He was hunched over something, nudging it gently with his nose. His body curved protectively around whatever he'd found. June's heart leaped into her throat. "Finn, what have you—" Her voice trailed off as she drew closer and saw what had captured his attention. There, curled up in a tiny ball on the wet ground, was a kitten. It was soaked through, its small body shivering violently, its gray fur plastered to its tiny frame. For a moment, June's medical training kicked in, and she quickly unwrapped her wool scarf from around her neck. With gentle hands, she scooped up the trembling creature, cradling it against her chest as she wrapped it securely. She could feel its rapid heartbeat against her palm. "Oh, you poor little thing," she whispered, her voice catching. Finn stayed close to her side as they hurried back to the house, his protective instinct evident in every step. His wet fur brushed against her legs as he guided her through the darkness. Inside, June grabbed a soft towel from the linen closet and began carefully drying the kitten. Her hands shook slightly as memories of her nursing days flooded back. All those times she'd cared for those who needed her most. The kitten let out a tiny mew, barely audible over the storm. Finn settled himself nearby, his eyes fixed intently on the tiny bundle in June's lap, his head tilted with curiosity and concern. While outside, the storm continued its wild dance across the night sky, lightning occasionally illuminating the room in brief, brilliant flashes. June's hands trembled slightly as she placed a small ceramic bowl on the kitchen counter, her fingers lingering on its smooth rim. The storm outside hadn't let up, and rain drummed steadily against the window panes, punctuated by distant rumbles of thunder. The tiny kitten, still bundled in a soft blanket, lay on a folded towel nearby, its bright blue eyes following her every movement with an intensity that made her chest tighten. Finn had settled himself on the floor just beneath the counter, his watchful gaze alternating between June and their unexpected guest, his tail thumping softly against the worn linoleum. "What am I going to do with you, little one?" June murmured, warming some milk in a pan on the stovetop. The familiar motions of caring for something vulnerable brought back memories of her years as a nurse, of quiet hospital nights and gentle reassurances. She remembered the quiet satisfaction of easing pain, of helping others heal, of making a real difference in people's lives. Rummaging through a kitchen drawer filled with odds and ends, June found an eyedropper she kept for medications. "This might work better than a bowl," she said softly, carefully filling it with the warm milk. The kitten's pitiful state tugged at her heart, its ribs visible through matted fur like tiny piano keys, its tiny frame trembling despite the warmth of the kitchen. A patch of mud still clung to one ear, making it look even more forlorn. As she gently fed the kitten drops of milk, watching its tiny pink tongue dart out eagerly, June's mind wandered to darker memories. She and Robert had tried so hard to adopt, visiting agencies, filling out countless forms, painting the spare bedroom cheerful colors. But something always fell through at the last minute. Too old, they'd been told eventually, those two simple words crushing years of hope. The rejection still stung, even years later, like a wound that never quite healed properly. Finn's sudden movement caught her attention. He'd risen and was now nosing the edge of the counter, tail wagging slowly, his brown eyes soft with curiosity. The kitten, having finished its milk, wobbled toward him on unsteady legs like a tiny drunk sailor. June tensed, ready to intervene, but Finn merely sniffed the tiny creature gently, then licked its head once with surprising tenderness, smoothing down the messy fur. "Well, that's unexpected," June whispered, watching the interaction with wonder. She'd never seen Finn take to a cat before. He usually ignored them completely on their walks. Then again, they'd never had one around, especially not one so small and helpless. Finding an old wicker basket in her craft room, still containing scraps of yarn from her last knitting project, June lined it with soft towels, creating a nest of warmth. "Just for tonight," she told herself firmly, though something in her chest tightened at the words, recognizing the lie. "We'll figure things out in the morning." The kitten's white fur gleamed like silk in the firelight as June settled it into the makeshift bed. "Pearl," she found herself saying, the name rising unbidden to her lips. "You look like a little pearl." The name slipped out before she could stop it, and June bit her lip, tasting the faint mint of her lip balm. Naming it meant attachment, and she wasn't sure she was ready for that, for the responsibility and the risk of loss that came with caring. Finn padded over and lay down beside the basket, resting his graying muzzle on his paws with a contented sigh. His eyes met June's, warm and knowing, and she saw something there that reminded her of younger days, when she and Robert would spend evenings on the porch swing, dreaming of the family they'd never had, planning for futures that never came to be. Watching Pearl curl up in her basket, tiny paws tucked beneath her chest, with Finn standing guard beside her like a gentle giant, June felt something shift inside her chest. It was a feeling she hadn't experienced in years, like a frozen stream beginning to thaw in spring sunshine. A warmth that both ached and soothed, spreading through her chest like honey, reminding her that her heart wasn't quite as closed as she'd thought it was. The morning sun painted golden stripes across June's kitchen floor through the partially drawn curtains, casting long shadows that danced with each gentle breeze. A soft, high-pitched meow pulled her attention to the basket near the fireplace, where Pearl was attempting to scale its woven sides with determined little hops. Her tiny white paws batted at the edge while Finn watched from his usual spot, his head cocked to one side, ears perked with interest. "Well, good morning to you, too," June said, shuffling over in her worn cotton slippers. She scooped up the kitten, who immediately started purring against her chest, tiny vibrations warming her heart. "Hungry, are we?" "You certainly sound like it." While June prepared Pearl's breakfast, warm milk with a bit of cat food she'd found in the back of her pantry, tucked behind some old cans of soup, the kitten squirmed in her arms, eager to explore every corner of her new world. As soon as June set her down with the food bowl, Pearl took a few quick laps, whiskers twitching with satisfaction, before darting off across the kitchen floor like a streak of white lightning. "Oh dear," June muttered, watching as Pearl discovered the potted fern by the window, its leaves swaying invitingly in the morning light. The kitten batted at the drooping leaves, her tail twitching with excitement, eyes wide with wonder. Before June could intervene, Pearl had launched herself at the plant, sending the pot teetering precariously. It crashed to the floor with a sharp crack, spilling dark soil across the clean tiles in a fan-shaped mess. Finn let out a low growl of disapproval, but stayed put in his corner. June sighed, reaching for the dustpan and brush she kept under the sink. "You're quite the troublemaker, aren't you? Just like a certain someone I used to know." As she cleaned up the mess, Pearl zoomed past her feet, chasing a dust mote that sparkled in the sunbeam. The kitten's path led her straight to Finn, who had been watching the chaos unfold with dignified disapproval, his brown eyes following every movement. Without warning, Pearl pounced on his tail, her tiny teeth barely grazing the fur, playful and fearless. Finn jerked away with a startled yelp, giving Pearl an offended look that could only be described as scandalized, before relocating to the other side of the kitchen with as much dignity as he could muster. June couldn't help but laugh at his expression, something between annoyance and wounded pride, his tail held high in protest. "My quiet mornings aren't so quiet anymore, are they?" June said to Finn, who huffed in response, turning his head away dramatically. She watched Pearl tear through the kitchen again, knocking over a stack of magazines she'd meant to recycle, pages fluttering to the floor like autumn leaves. Part of her wanted to be irritated. She'd always kept such a tidy house, everything in its proper place. But there was something infectious about the kitten's unbridled joy and enthusiasm for life. Later that morning, June found herself pausing in her chores to watch Pearl and Finn in the living room, dustcloth forgotten in her hand. The kitten had finally worn herself out and was curled up in a patch of sunlight, her tiny chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. To June's surprise, Finn had settled nearby, his watchful gaze never leaving the sleeping kitten, a subtle shift in his usual aloof demeanor. June's neat and orderly world had been turned upside down in less than a day, scattered like the soil from the fallen plant. Looking at Pearl's tiny sleeping form, her white fur glowing in the sunlight, she wondered if keeping her might not be such a bad idea after all. Sometimes the best changes in life came wrapped in unexpected packages, even ones with tiny paws and a talent for chaos. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across June's front yard as she settled into her favorite wicker chair on the porch. Her tea sent wisps of steam into the cooling air while she watched Pearl dart between patches of grass, attacking fallen leaves with fierce determination. Finn sprawled at her feet, his chin resting on his paws. "She's quite the little hunter, isn't she?" June murmured, reaching down to scratch behind Finn's ears. The old collie's tail thumped against the wooden boards in response. A crisp breeze rustled through the trees, sending more leaves spiraling down. Pearl leapt and twisted, trying to catch them mid-air. Her playful antics brought a smile to June's face, until a sudden scratching sound drew her attention. Finn had moved to the edge of the porch and was pawing at the dirt underneath with unusual intensity. "Finn, stop that!" June called out, but he ignored her, continuing to dig with purpose. "Finn!" Setting down her tea, June pushed herself up from her chair and walked over to investigate. Finn's paws had already created a sizable hole, and something was glinting in the disturbed earth. "What have you found there?" June knelt down, grimacing as her knees protested. She reached into the hole and pulled out a mud-covered object. As she brushed away the dirt, her heart skipped a beat. It was a dog collar, worn and weathered, with a small metal tag still attached. June's hands trembled slightly as she wiped away more dirt, revealing engraved letters. Luna. The name hit her like a physical blow. Memories stirred, her husband coming home one rainy evening, talking about a frightened stray dog he'd spotted near his work. They'd tried to help her, but... "Bad dog, Finn," June said half-heartedly, but her voice lacked conviction. She stood up slowly, clutching the collar. Pearl had abandoned her leaf-chasing to investigate, batting curiously at June's ankles. Inside, June placed the muddy collar on the mantel, next to a framed photo of her husband. She'd deal with it later. Right now, she needed fresh air. Back on the porch, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Pearl had discovered fireflies emerging in the growing dusk, charging after their blinking lights with endless enthusiasm. Finn sat at attention nearby, watching over his small charge. June settled back into her chair, but her eyes kept drifting to the window, where she could see the collar sitting on the mantel, a reminder of a story she'd tried so hard to forget. The soft lamplight cast a warm glow across June's living room as she settled into her favorite armchair. Finn stretched out on the rug beside her, while Pearl curled up against his side, their unlikely friendship now a comforting constant. June's fingers traced the worn edges of the leather-bound photo album in her lap, one she hadn't opened since before her husband's passing. "Well," she whispered to her furry companions, "shall we take a little trip down memory lane?" The album's spine creaked as she opened it. Each page held carefully preserved moments: her wedding day, holidays at the beach, quiet moments in their garden. June smiled at the photographs, letting the memories wash over her like gentle waves. Halfway through the album, her hand froze. There, slightly faded but still clear, was a photograph she didn't immediately recognize. Her husband stood in their backyard, his familiar warm smile lighting up his face as he held a scruffy, medium-sized dog. The animal's coat was a mix of brown and gray, its eyes bright despite its disheveled appearance. "That's strange," June murmured, leaning closer to study the image. Something about the dog tugged at her memory, like a word caught on the tip of her tongue. She glanced at the collar sitting on the mantel, its tarnished tag bearing Luna's name. Finn's ears perked up as June stood, carrying the album to the fireplace. She held the photograph next to the collar, her heart beating a little faster. The dog in the picture had similar coloring to the vague memories she had of Luna, but the details felt fuzzy, like trying to recall a dream upon waking. "I know there was a story here," she said softly, more to herself than her pets. "Your dad tried to save her, didn't he, Finn?" A warm weight pressed against her leg as Pearl rubbed against her, purring loudly. June scooped up the kitten, holding her close as she continued studying the photograph. The happy expression on her husband's face stirred something in her memory. His excitement about helping the stray, his determination to earn its trust. "Maybe Margaret would remember," June said, thinking of her friend who had lived next door back then. "She was always bringing us casseroles and checking in on us." Setting Pearl down, June carefully removed the photograph from its sleeve and placed it on the mantel beside Luna's collar. The two items seemed to belong together, pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. Yet looking at them filled her with an odd mixture of nostalgia and unease, like opening a door to a room she wasn't sure she wanted to enter. Later that night, as June prepared for bed, she paused in the doorway of her bedroom. Finn lay near Pearl's basket, his head resting on his paws as he watched the kitten sleep. The sight of them together, this unlikely pair who had found their way into her heart, brought a smile to her face, despite her troubled thoughts. Morning sunlight flooded June's kitchen, casting long shadows across the tile floor. She hummed an old Beatles tune while gathering her cleaning supplies, a familiar routine that usually brought her comfort. Finn lounged in his favorite spot near the window while Pearl watched from her perch on the counter, her tail swishing back and forth with interest. "Time to get this place spick and span," June said, reaching for her broom. Before she could take her first sweep, Pearl pounced on the bristles, batting at them with her tiny paws. "Oh dear," June chuckled, trying to gently nudge the kitten away. "This isn't a toy, little one." But Pearl had other ideas. She darted between June's feet, chasing the broom's movement and turning what should have been a simple task into an impromptu game. June couldn't help but smile, even as her progress slowed to a crawl. In the living room, things didn't improve. As June dusted the bookshelf, Pearl leapt onto the lower shelf, sending a stack of paperbacks tumbling to the floor with a loud thump. Finn barked sharply at the noise, making Pearl scurry under the couch. "It's all right, Finn," June soothed, bending to collect the fallen books. "She's just being a kitten." Later, while June wiped down the kitchen counters, Pearl's curiosity led her to Finn's food bowl. The old collie growled low in his throat as the kitten approached his dinner. "Pearl, no!" June quickly scooped up the kitten. "That's Finn's space, sweetie." She set Pearl down on the other side of the kitchen, her heart racing a bit from the close call. Exhausted from trying to clean while managing her two pets, June sank into her kitchen chair. She watched Pearl batting at a dust bunny while Finn kept a wary distance. "What am I doing?" she asked herself aloud, running a hand through her silver hair. "I'm not sure I can handle both of you." The thought of failing either animal made her chest tight with worry. After a moment's reflection, June stood up and grabbed her notepad from the counter. "First things first," she muttered, beginning to write. "Vet appointment tomorrow. Need to ask about proper kitten care. Feeding schedules." She continued listing questions, determined to get professional advice. That evening, June looked over her list one final time before bed. A soft sound drew her attention to the living room rug, where Finn lay stretched out with Pearl curled against his side, both sound asleep. The sight made her smile, easing some of her earlier concerns. The morning air was crisp as June carefully placed Pearl into a small blue carrier. The kitten mewed softly, her tiny paws pressing against the mesh door. June grabbed her purse and the list of questions she'd prepared the night before. "Be good, Finn," she called over her shoulder. Through the living room window, she could see Finn's worried face, his nose pressed against the glass as she walked to her car. The drive to Dr. Thompson's veterinary clinic was peaceful, with Pearl only letting out occasional protests from her carrier. June found herself talking softly to the kitten, explaining where they were going. "We just need to make sure you're healthy, little one." The bell above the clinic door chimed as June entered. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and pet shampoo. Sarah, the receptionist, brightened immediately. "Mrs. Holloway, and who do we have here?" June placed the carrier on the counter. "This is Pearl. Finn found her during the storm a few days ago." "Oh, she's precious," Sarah cooed, peering into the carrier. "Dr. Thompson will be with you shortly." In the exam room, Dr. Thompson gently lifted Pearl onto the metal table. Her experienced hands moved carefully over the kitten's small body, checking joints and muscles. "She's underweight, but otherwise healthy. No fleas or ear mites, which is good news." "What about her age?" June asked, watching as Pearl tried to catch the doctor's stethoscope. "I'd say about 8 weeks. Given her condition, she was likely abandoned." Dr. Thompson's voice held a note of sadness. "But she's lucky Finn found her when he did." As the examination continued, Dr. Thompson shared advice about kitten care. Make sure to keep her away from any rat bait or pesticides on your property. Kittens are curious, and these can be deadly. I'd recommend checking your yard and storage areas. June nodded, taking mental notes. "What about Finn? They seem to be getting along, but just keep supervising their interactions. Finn seems like a gentle soul, but always ensure Pearl has an escape route if she feels overwhelmed. Positive reinforcement when they interact well is key." Before leaving, June stopped at the clinic's small shop. She selected premium kitten food, some colorful toy mice, and a soft bed with high sides. Pearl meowed excitedly from her carrier, as if approving the choices. Back home, June set up Pearl's new bed in a sunny corner of the living room. She scattered the toys nearby, watching as Finn approached to investigate. His tail wagged slowly as he sniffed each item. Pearl wasted no time pouncing on a sparkly blue mouse, batting it across the floor. June settled into her armchair, feeling a warmth spread through her chest as she watched her unlikely pair, the aging collie and the tiny kitten, sharing space in her once quiet home. June pushed the armchair a few inches to the left, creating a cozy nook by the window. Sunlight spilled across the hardwood floor, warming the spot she'd chosen for Pearl's new domain. Finn observed from his usual place by the fireplace, his head tilted with curiosity. "What do you think, boy?" June asked, unfolding the plush cat bed she'd bought yesterday. "Think she'll like it here?" She arranged Pearl's toys carefully, a small ball with a bell inside, a feathered wand, and a fuzzy mouse. The scratching post came next, its sisal rope surface perfect for tiny claws. Pearl darted over immediately, her eyes wide with excitement as she batted at the dangling toy. "Well, someone approves," June chuckled, watching Pearl attack the post with surprising vigor. As she worked, memories of Tom flooded back. He would have loved this, creating a special space for a rescued animal. That had been his way. June remembered how he'd spend hours building shelters for the strays that wandered onto their property, always ensuring they had warm, dry places to sleep. "You would have adored her, Tom," she whispered, her throat tight with emotion. Pearl's playful antics drew Finn's attention. His tail began to wag as he watched her pounce and tumble. Slowly, cautiously, he moved closer to investigate the new setup. Pearl noticed him approaching and paused her play, giving him a curious look. After a moment of mutual observation, she returned to batting her toy mouse, seemingly accepting his presence. June smiled at their interaction. "That's it, you two. Nice and easy." After a few minutes of energetic play, Pearl curled up in her new bed, the sunshine making her white fur glow. Finn settled nearby, his protective instincts evident in the way he positioned himself. Looking at them together, June felt a familiar creative spark, something she hadn't experienced in months. She walked to the closet and pulled out her old wooden easel, running her fingers over its worn surface. Her sketchbook was exactly where she'd left it, tucked away on the top shelf. Settling into her chair, June opened to a fresh page. Her pencil moved with surprising confidence as she began sketching the outline of Finn's gentle face and Pearl's tiny form. The familiar motion felt like greeting an old friend, and she found herself smiling as she worked. June woke to the familiar sound of tiny paws skittering across the hardwood floor. Sunlight filtered through her bedroom curtains as she opened her eyes, catching sight of Pearl chasing a small blue ball down the hallway. "Someone's energetic this morning," she mumbled, sitting up in bed. In the kitchen, June barely had time to pour her morning tea when Pearl zoomed past, batting the ball with enthusiastic swipes. The kitten's energy seemed boundless, her white fur a blur of motion as she darted from room to room. Crash! June rushed to the living room to find her favorite ceramic vase in pieces on the floor, water and flowers scattered across the hardwood. Pearl sat nearby, looking decidedly unapologetic. "Oh, Pearl," June sighed, grabbing paper towels to clean up the mess. As she reached for the roll, Pearl pounced, catching the edge with her claws. The roll spun rapidly, creating a white trail across the floor as it unraveled completely. "Really?" June couldn't help but laugh at the sight of Pearl tangled in paper towels. Finn watched from his spot by the window, letting out a small woof when Pearl suddenly leapt onto his tail. Instead of moving away as he usually did, he simply turned his head to watch her, his expression almost resigned. June's tea sat cooling on the kitchen counter, and she had just reached for it when Pearl jumped onto the table, nearly sending the cup flying. "That's quite enough of that," June said, scooping up the kitten. "I think we all need some fresh air." Outside, the autumn sun warmed the yard as June settled into her garden chair. She watched in amazement as Finn trotted after Pearl, keeping a watchful eye on her as she explored the flower beds. His protective nature seemed to have won out over his initial wariness. Pearl pounced on leaves and chased butterflies while Finn followed, his tail wagging slightly. When she ventured too close to the fence, he gave a gentle bark, guiding her back toward the house. The afternoon passed quickly, filled with Pearl's adventures and Finn's growing patience. As evening approached and the air grew cooler, they headed inside. June lit the fireplace, its warm glow filling the living room. She looked up from her book to find Pearl curled up on Finn's back as he lay by the fire. The sight filled her heart with joy. This unlikely pair had somehow become family. Finn's eyes were closed contentedly, completely at peace with his tiny companion. June watched them, marveling at how quickly things had changed. Her quiet house had transformed into a home full of life and surprises, all thanks to one small kitten and a loyal old dog. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows as June stood at the bottom of the attic stairs. She clicked on her flashlight, testing its beam before starting up the creaky wooden steps. Each footfall echoed in the quiet house, the old stairs protesting under her weight. The attic air was thick with dust and memories. June's flashlight beam cut through the dimness, illuminating cobwebs and stacked boxes. The musty smell of aged wood and stored treasures filled her nose as she made her way to where she remembered storing her art supplies. "They must be here somewhere," she muttered, pushing aside a box of old Christmas decorations. Her hands found a familiar wooden case. June pulled her chair closer to the dining table, spreading out her art supplies with careful precision. The leather-bound journal lay open beside her, its pages filled with her husband's neat handwriting describing Luna. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened her sketchbook to a fresh page. "Okay, let's see," she whispered, running her finger along the journal entry. "Brown and white coat, one ear that flopped over." She began with gentle strokes, letting the pencil dance across the paper. The quiet scratching of graphite filled the room as June sketched. Each line brought Luna's image into sharper focus. The gentle slope of her nose, the worried eyes her husband had described so vividly. Finn lay nearby, his chin resting on his paws, while Pearl curled up in a patch of evening sunlight streaming through the window. As the drawing took shape, memories surfaced like bubbles rising to the surface of still water. June remembered the day her husband had first spotted Luna, thin and scared, hiding behind their garbage cans. He'd spent hours trying to coax her closer with bits of food and soft words. "We tried so hard," June murmured, her hand pausing over the paper. Her vision blurred with unexpected tears. "We really did try, didn't we?" The weight of guilt pressed against her chest. Guilt for not searching longer when Luna disappeared, for letting her husband down, for giving up too easily. Her pencil moved again, adding shadows under Luna's eyes, capturing the wariness of a dog who'd known too much hardship. A small paw batted at her pencil, making her jump. Pearl had climbed onto the table, her green eyes bright with curiosity. The kitten's presence pulled June back from her memories, anchoring her in the present moment. "You silly thing," June said softly, scratching behind Pearl's ears. "I suppose you want to help?" She continued sketching, working around Pearl's occasional interference. The act of drawing felt like opening a long-locked door, letting out feelings she'd kept buried since her husband's death. Each stroke of the pencil seemed to release a little more of the pain she'd carried. As the drawing neared completion, June sat back and studied it. Luna's face looked back at her from the paper. Not just a memory anymore, but something real and tangible. She needed to know more, to understand what had happened to this dog who'd meant so much to her husband. Standing carefully, June carried the sketch to the mantel. She placed it next to the weathered collar and the journal, creating a small memorial to a dog they'd tried to save. Finn padded over to sit beside her, while Pearl weaved between her ankles, purring softly. Looking at her two companions, June felt something shift inside her, a small spark of hope taking root among the old regrets. Maybe it wasn't too late to make things right, to honor Luna's memory by uncovering her story. June hummed softly as she poured coffee into her favorite mug, the morning sun casting warm shadows across her kitchen floor. Finn lay in his usual spot by the door, his tail thumping occasionally against the hardwood. Near the fireplace, Pearl batted playfully at a small red ball, her tiny paws sending it skittering across the floor. "Breakfast will be ready soon," June called out cheerfully, reaching for the cat food. But something made her pause. The familiar sound of Pearl's playing had stopped. June turned around, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Pearl lying motionless near the fireplace. "Pearl?" Her voice wavered as she rushed over, coffee forgotten. The tiny kitten lay limp, her usual energy completely gone. June's hand shook as she gently lifted Pearl's small body. "Oh no, sweetie, what's wrong?" Pearl let out a weak meow, barely audible. June's nursing instincts kicked in immediately. She checked Pearl's breathing, shallow and rapid. The kitten felt too warm against her palm. "Hold on, baby," June whispered, her throat tight with fear. She grabbed her phone with trembling fingers and called the vet's office. "Dr. Anderson's office," a voice answered. "This is June Holloway," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Something's wrong with Pearl. She was playing just fine, but now she's completely lethargic. She's burning up and barely responding." "Bring her in right away," the receptionist urged. "Dr. Anderson will see her immediately." June grabbed her purse and car keys, cradling Pearl against her chest. Finn jumped up, barking anxiously as she headed for the door. "Stay, boy," she commanded gently. "I'll be back soon." Finn whined, pressing his nose against the window as June hurried to her car. Pearl felt like a tiny rag doll in her arms, so different from her usual wiggly self. June's hands trembled as she started the car. "Please hang on, Pearl," she whispered, fighting back tears as she backed out of the driveway. Every few seconds, she glanced down at the kitten's barely rising chest. The 10-minute drive to the vet's office felt endless. June's heart pounded as memories of past losses threatened to overwhelm her. She couldn't lose Pearl, not like this, not so soon. When she finally pulled into the clinic's parking lot, Dr. Anderson was already waiting at the door. June rushed inside, carefully transferring Pearl into the vet's capable hands. "I'll examine her right away," Dr. Anderson assured her, whisking Pearl into the back room. June sank into a waiting room chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The morning's peaceful routine felt like a distant memory as she sat there, praying silently for Pearl's survival. June sat rigid in the veterinary clinic's waiting room, her fingers twisting the worn hem for cardigan. The tick-tock of the wall clock echoed through the quiet space, each second stretching like an hour. When the vet finally emerged, June's heart lurched. "Mrs. Holloway," the vet said gently, "Pearl has ingested rat poison, most likely from somewhere near the riverbank you mentioned." The words hit June like a physical blow. "Will she?" Her voice cracked. "Her condition is very serious. The next 24 hours will be critical." June followed the vet into the examination room, where Pearl lay on a small metal table, looking impossibly tiny and fragile. The vet worked quickly, administering medication through a tiny IV line. "This will help counteract the poison," she explained, her movements precise and careful. June's mind drifted to the journal entry she'd read just days ago. Her husband's words floated back. "We can't save them all, but we must try." He'd written those words about Luna, the stray they couldn't save. Now history seemed to be repeating itself. "I should have been more careful," June whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I saw those traps by the river. I should have known." "Don't blame yourself," the vet said kindly. "You brought her in quickly, and we're doing everything we can." June stroked Pearl's soft fur with trembling fingers. The kitten's breathing was shallow but steady. "Stay with me, little one," she murmured. "Please stay with me." The vet adjusted some equipment. "I'd like you to stay close by. Sometimes having their loved ones near can make a difference." June nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She pulled a chair close to Pearl's table, maintaining gentle contact with the kitten while the vet continued treatment. Each breath Pearl took seemed precious, a tiny battle won against the poison trying to claim her. Hours later, June walked through her front door alone, her steps heavy. Finn greeted her immediately, his brown eyes full of concern. He pressed against her legs as she made her way to the fireplace. June sank into her armchair, and Finn settled at her feet. She stared at Pearl's empty bed, the sight of it making her chest ache. The kitten remained at the clinic under observation, fighting for her life. June arranged the soft blankets near the fireplace, creating a nest-like bed for Pearl. Her hands trembled as she gently placed the weakened kitten in the center. Pearl barely stirred, her tiny body rising and falling with shallow breaths. "There you go, sweet girl," June whispered, adjusting the blanket. nice and warm. Finn settled beside them, his brown eyes fixed on Pearl. He rested his head on his paws, maintaining his vigilant watch. June leaned back against her armchair, drawing her knees to her chest. The clock ticked steadily in the darkness. Every so often, June would lean forward to check on Pearl, her heart clenching at how still the kitten lay. The scene felt hauntingly familiar. The quiet room, the careful monitoring, the fear that gripped her heart. Just like those final nights with Robert. "I sat with him just like this," she murmured to Finn. "Watching, waiting, praying." Her voice caught in her throat. "I can't lose her too, Finn. I just can't." Throughout the night, June drifted in and out of uneasy sleep. Each time she jerked awake, her first thought was of Pearl. She'd reach out with gentle fingers to feel the kitten's warmth, to make sure she was still breathing. Finn stayed steadfast beside her, occasionally nudging her hand with his wet nose, when her shoulders began to shake with silent tears. His presence anchored her, just as it had during those dark days after Robert's passing. "You're such a good boy," she whispered, scratching behind his ears. "Such a good, brave boy." The hours crawled by. June's back ached from sitting on the floor, but she refused to move to her bed. Instead, she kept her vigil, whispering soft encouragements to Pearl whenever the kitten made the slightest movement. As the first rays of dawn crept through the windows, Pearl shifted slightly in her blanket nest. Her tiny paw twitched, and she let out a faint mewl. June held her breath, watching as the kitten's breathing seemed just a bit stronger than before. The morning sunlight streamed through the living room windows, painting everything in a soft golden glow. June sat cross-legged on the floor beside Pearl's makeshift bed, her eyes heavy from another sleepless night. Then she saw it. Pearl's tiny head lifted slightly, her eyes blinking in the morning light. "Oh, sweetheart," June breathed, her heart leaping. She reached out with trembling fingers to stroke Pearl's head. The kitten responded with a faint meow, barely more than a whisper. June fumbled for her phone, dialing the vet's number with shaking hands. "Dr. Roberts." Pearl just lifted her head and she made a small sound. "That's encouraging news," the vet said warmly. "Keep giving her the medicine every 4 hours. Make sure she stays warm and try to get her to drink some water. Even a few drops will help." Throughout the day, June maintained her vigil. She measured medicine carefully, offering it to Pearl with gentle persistence. Every hour, she dipped her finger in water and touched it to Pearl's mouth, coaxing her to drink. Finn hadn't left Pearl's side since they'd returned from the vet. He lay close beside her bed, his tail thumping softly whenever she stirred. When Pearl managed to shift position slightly, Finn nudged her gently with his nose, as if encouraging her. "You're such a good protector," June told him, scratching his ears. Watching Pearl fight for life stirred memories of Robert's final battle. He too had shown such determination, such quiet strength. June remembered holding his hand through endless hospital nights, clinging to every small sign of improvement. As evening approached, June held a small water bowl near Pearl's face. Her heart soared when the kitten extended her neck slightly and lapped at the water. Just a few tiny sips, but it felt like a miracle. Tears spilled down June's cheeks. "Good girl," she whispered. "That's my brave girl." In the fading daylight, Pearl managed to curl herself closer to Finn's warm body. June picked up her sketchbook, her hand moving across the paper as she captured the scene before her. Finn's protective stance, Pearl's tiny form pressed against his side. The simple act of drawing felt like a prayer of gratitude, a celebration of small victories and tender mercies. The morning light filtered through the curtains as June's eyes fluttered open. Her heart skipped a beat at the sight before her. Pearl was sitting up in her basket, her tiny form alert and steady. Though still weak, the kitten's eyes were bright and focused, a marked improvement from the listless state of recent days. Finn lay beside the basket, his tail thumping softly against the floor as he maintained his vigilant watch. "Good morning, sweet girl," June whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She reached out slowly, running a gentle finger along Pearl's back. The kitten leaned into her touch, offering a faint purr. Throughout the day, June devoted herself to Pearl's care with the patience and precision she'd learned during her nursing years. She warmed small portions of soft food, offering tiny amounts on her fingertip. "That's it, just a little bit more," she encouraged as Pearl took hesitant licks. Administering medicine proved challenging, but June persisted with gentle determination. "I know it doesn't taste good, but it's helping you get better," she murmured, carefully dispensing the prescribed dose. Finn remained a constant presence, his usual energetic nature subdued as he watched over Pearl. When the kitten stirred, he would inch closer, nudging her gently with his nose, as if checking on her progress. The tenderness in his actions brought tears to June's eyes. In the afternoon, Pearl attempted her first real steps since falling ill. Her legs wobbled like a newborn fawn's, but she managed to move from her basket to the blanket beside it. June held her breath, watching the tiny triumph unfold. "Look at you, brave girl," June praised, her face breaking into a genuine smile. Finn's tail wagged faster, sharing in the excitement of Pearl's achievement. As evening approached, Pearl grew more adventurous, taking tentative steps around her basket, though she tired quickly. Each small exploration ended with her returning to rest, but June could see the spark of life returning to her beloved kitten. The sunset painted the living room in warm hues as June settled on the floor beside her furry companions. Pearl dozed peacefully in her basket while Finn pressed against June's leg, offering his steady comfort. Running her fingers through his fur, June marveled at Pearl's fighting spirit. "You're going to be just fine," she whispered to Pearl, feeling relief wash over her like a gentle wave. For the first time since Pearl's collapse, June allowed herself to believe those words completely. A week had passed, and Pearl's recovery brought new life to June's quiet home. On this bright autumn morning, June gathered her courage and decided it was time for a gentle family outing. She tucked Pearl into her favorite basket, lined with soft blankets, while Finn waited eagerly by the door. "Ready for a little adventure?" June asked, smiling as Pearl's curious eyes peered over the basket's edge. The path to the riverbank was carpeted with crisp leaves that crunched beneath their feet. Finn trotted ahead, his tail wagging with familiar excitement. The air carried the sweet, earthy scent of autumn, and sunlight filtered through the remaining leaves on the trees. "Easy now, Finn," June called as they approached the spot where he had discovered Pearl. Her heart quickened at the memory of that stormy night. Oh, Pearl stretched up in her basket, whiskers twitching at the new smells and sounds. Finn darted to his usual spot near the water's edge, nose to the ground, moving in determined circles as if searching for something important. June watched him, remembering how his instincts had led them to Pearl that rainy evening. Setting the basket down on a dry patch of grass, June surveyed the riverbank. Her eyes caught on the glint of old metal, abandoned traps half buried in leaves and scattered debris that could harm unsuspecting animals. The sight made her stomach clench. "This won't do at all," she murmured, making mental notes of what needed clearing. Pearl mewed softly from her basket, drawing June's attention back to the present. As she watched Pearl cautiously explore the edge of her basket, June's mind drifted to her husband's journal entries about Luna. Had the stray dog wandered these same paths? Had she fallen victim to one of these hidden dangers? The questions weighed heavy on her heart. The afternoon sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the water. "Time to head home," June announced, gathering Pearl's basket. Finn gave one last sniff around his spot before falling in step beside her. Back in the warmth of their living room, June settled into her chair by the fire. She held Luna's worn collar in one hand and her husband's journal in the other, studying them in the flickering firelight. "Luna," she whispered, running her thumb over the tarnished nameplate, "I think I understand now." A sense of peace washed over her, unexpected but welcome, as Pearl and Finn dozed contentedly at her feet. The morning sun streamed through the sunroom windows, casting long shadows across June's old wooden easel. She ran her fingers over her paintbrushes, each one holding memories of artwork created years ago. The bristles were still soft, though some showed signs of age. "Well, look who's curious," June chuckled as Pearl padded into the room, immediately drawn to the colorful array of supplies spread across the table. Finn followed close behind, settling onto his usual spot near June's feet. With careful strokes, June began sketching the outline of Finn's noble profile. Pearl watched intently from the table's edge, her tail twitching with interest. The familiar motion of pencil against canvas brought back a flood of memories. Lazy Sunday afternoons spent drawing while her husband read nearby, the quiet companionship they'd shared. "Oh, you little troublemaker," June laughed as Pearl pounced on a brush that had rolled to the edge of the table. The kitten's playful batting sent it clattering to the floor, where Finn watched with patient amusement. As June mixed her paints, choosing warm browns for Finn's coat and delicate grays for Pearl's fur, she felt something unlock inside her chest. Each brushstroke seemed to release emotions she'd kept buried. Grief, joy, loneliness, and hope, all flowing onto the canvas. Pearl, not content to be just a subject, decided to participate in the artistic process. She weaved between paint tubes and water cups, occasionally leaving tiny paw prints across June's reference sketches. Rather than scold her, June found herself incorporating these little accidents into her work, letting Pearl's spirit shine through. "You're quite the artist's assistant," June murmured as Pearl stretched up to bat at her brush mid-stroke. The resulting smudge actually added character to Finn's fur, making it look more natural and alive. Hours passed like minutes as June worked, her hands remembering their old skill. She captured Finn's watchful expression and Pearl's playful energy, their unlikely friendship evident in every detail. The painting took shape, Finn lying regally while Pearl perched on his back, both of them bathed in warm sunlight. When she finally stepped back to examine her work, June felt tears prick at her eyes. There on the canvas was not just a portrait of her pets, but a testament to healing and new beginnings. She carefully lifted the finished painting and carried it to the mantel, placing it where the morning sun would catch it just right. "This is just the beginning," she whispered, watching Pearl curl up on Finn's back in an echo of their painted pose. The evening sky darkened ominously as June cleared away the dinner dishes. Through the kitchen window, she watched heavy clouds roll in, their edges tinged with an eerie green. The wind picked up, rattling the wind chimes on the porch. Finn paced near the back door, his nails clicking against the hardwood floor. His ears twitched at every gust of wind, and soft whines escaped his throat. Pearl, sprawled on her back near the fireplace, batted lazily at a piece of yarn, completely unbothered by the approaching storm. "It's all right, boy," June said softly, but Finn continued his anxious circuit. The first drops of rain pelted the windows as June moved through the house, checking latches and drawing curtains. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Finn's whines grew louder, turning into sharp, urgent barks that echoed through the house. "Come here, Finn!" June patted the cushion beside her, but he refused to settle, his tail low and his eyes fixed on the windows. Pearl sat up now, watching Finn with tilted head and curious eyes. as if trying to decode his strange behavior. June built up the fire, hoping its warmth and familiar crackling would soothe Finn's nerves. The storm intensified, rain hammering against the roof as wind howled through the trees. Lightning flashed, followed by a deafening crack of thunder that made the windows rattle. Pearl padded over to Finn's basket, attempting to climb in beside him, but he moved away, too agitated to tolerate company. His barking grew more insistent, and he scratched at the door. A loud crash from outside made June jump. It sounded like a branch breaking, possibly hitting the house. "Stay here," she told Finn and Pearl, hurrying to check the damage. June peered through the rain-streaked windows, trying to locate the source of the noise. Nothing seemed immediately wrong, but she needed to be sure. She grabbed her jacket and stepped onto the porch, scanning the yard quickly. When she returned inside, her heart stopped. The living room was empty. Finn's basket sat abandoned, and Pearl's toys lay scattered on the floor. Both animals had vanished. Finn? Pearl?" June called out, checking the kitchen and hallway. No response. No clicking of nails on hardwood, no meowing. Nothing but the howling wind and pounding rain. Panic rose in her chest as she realized they must have slipped out while she was checking the yard. June grabbed her raincoat and flashlight with trembling hands. "Please be okay," she whispered, stepping out into the raging storm. The rain stung her face as she called their names, her voice nearly lost in the wind. Lightning illuminated the yard in harsh flashes, making shadows leap and dance as June searched desperately for any sign of her beloved companions. The storm unleashed its fury as June stepped onto her back porch. Rain pelted down in heavy sheets, drumming against the roof with deafening force. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the yard, where puddles had already formed in the grass. Her heart pounded as she pulled her raincoat tighter around herself. "Finn! Pearl!" Her voice was swallowed by a crack of thunder. The wind whipped at her clothes as she descended the porch steps, mud squelching beneath her boots. The beam of her flashlight bounced wildly as she moved, illuminating empty spaces where her beloved pets should have been. Each passing moment without them heightened her anxiety. "Please," she whispered, fighting back tears. "Not again." The image of Pearl's recent brush with death flashed through her mind. The kitten was still recovering, still vulnerable, and Finn, her loyal, aging companion, could be hurt trying to protect her. The thought spurred June forward despite the brutal weather. Near the back gate, she spotted paw prints in the mud, large ones that could only belong to Finn. They led toward the woods and the river beyond. June's hands trembled as she followed the tracks, remembering how Finn had led her to Pearl that stormy night weeks ago. "Finn! Pearl!" she called again, her voice breaking. The wind howled through the trees, drowning out her words. Rain stung her face as she pressed forward, branches whipping at her coat. The flashlight beam flickered, making her heart skip. She smacked it against her palm, praying it wouldn't die. The path to the river was treacherous in the dark, slick with mud and fallen leaves. Then, through the storm's chaos, she heard it. A distant bark. Finn's voice unmistakable even through the tempest. "Finn!" June called out, hope surging through her chest. She moved faster now, following the sound. Another bark, closer this time, guided her toward the riverbank. Her flashlight caught movement ahead, a familiar silhouette against the darkness. Finn stood at the river's edge, his fur soaked, but his stance alert and protective. "Finn!" June's voice cracked with relief as she pushed forward through the storm. June's flashlight beam caught Finn's figure near the riverbank, his barking growing more urgent as she approached. Her heart nearly stopped when she saw where he was standing, by a cluster of dark, slick rocks near the rushing water. She stumbled forward, mud clinging to her boots. "Finn, where's Pearl?" Her voice cracked with fear. Finn's barking intensified as he pawed at the rocks. June swept her flashlight beam across the area, and there, wedged in a narrow crevice, she spotted a tiny form. Pearl's white fur was barely visible in the darkness. "Oh God, no," June whispered, dropping to her hands and knees. The rocks were treacherous, slippery with rain and river spray. June's hands scraped against the rough surface as she crawled forward. She lost her footing once, her heart lurching as she slid several inches toward the water, but she caught herself. Nothing would stop her from reaching Pearl. Finn stayed close, his wet fur brushing against her as she stretched toward the crevice. Pearl's faint meow nearly broke her heart. It was so weak, so frightened. "I'm coming, sweetheart," June called, her fingers finally reaching the kitten's sodden fur. With gentle movements, she worked her hands around Pearl's tiny body. The kitten felt cold and fragile, but she was alive. June carefully extracted her from the crevice, immediately tucking her inside her raincoat. "It's okay, I've got you," she murmured, holding Pearl close to her chest. She could feel the kitten's rapid heartbeat against her own. The journey back was treacherous. Rain continued to pour, but Finn stayed right beside her, as if ready to catch her if she slipped. His presence steadied her as they made their way across the muddy ground. Finally, they reached the house. June's hands trembled as she dried Pearl with a soft towel in front of the crackling fire. Finn shook himself, spraying water everywhere, then settled next to them, his eyes fixed on Pearl. June couldn't hold back her tears as she looked at her two companions, safe and sound. "We're not losing anyone tonight," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a golden glow across the living room. June wrapped her hands around a steaming cup of chamomile tea, drawing comfort from its warmth. Her eyes drifted to Finn and Pearl, both sleeping peacefully after their harrowing night. Pearl's chest rose and fell steadily, her small body curled against Finn's protective bulk. The events of the storm played through June's mind like scenes from a movie. The desperate search, the fear gripping her heart, and Finn's unwavering determination to protect Pearl. She set down her tea and reached for her husband's journal, its leather cover worn smooth from years of handling. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened to the familiar entry about Luna. The words, written in her husband's careful hand, seemed to speak directly to her heart. "We can't save them all, but we must try." She traced the letters with her fingertip, understanding their meaning more deeply than ever before. "Oh, Thomas," she whispered, "you knew all along, didn't you? About the healing power of loving these creatures?" June glanced at Finn and Pearl, marveling at how they'd transformed her quiet existence into something rich with purpose. Where there had been emptiness, now there was warmth. Where there had been silence, now there was life. Setting the journal aside, June pulled her sketchbook onto her lap. Her pencil moved with sure strokes across the paper, capturing Finn's protective stance and Pearl's delicate form by the riverbank. She added details, the glint of water, the rough texture of rocks, the way Finn's fur ruffled in the wind. The scene took shape beneath her hands, becoming more than just a drawing. It was a testament to love, courage, and second chances. As she worked, a profound sense of peace settled over her. The guilt she'd carried about Luna began to lift, replaced by understanding. She hadn't failed Luna. She and Thomas had tried their best, just as she was doing now with Pearl. When the sketch was complete, June stood carefully, not wanting to wake her sleeping companions. She placed it on the mantel, arranging it beside Luna's collar and Thomas's journal. The three items together told a story of loss and love, of endings and beginnings. "Thank you for everything," she whispered, feeling Thomas's presence in the quiet morning light. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees as June pulled into the parking lot of the local animal shelter. The brick building wasn't much to look at, but the cheerful paw prints painted on the windows made her smile. Inside her purse, she carried photos of Pearl and Finn, eager to share their story. Sarah, the shelter manager, greeted June warmly. Her eyes lit up as June shared Pearl's journey from abandoned kitten to beloved family member. June's voice grew soft as she described the night Finn found Pearl, and how caring for her had awakened something she thought she'd lost. "We desperately need more foster homes," Sarah explained, leading June through the shelter, "especially for young animals like Pearl. They need extra attention and care to thrive." Tiny meows echoed from the cat room, where a volunteer bottle-fed a weeks-old kitten. June watched, remembering how she'd nursed Pearl back to health. Her hands itched to help. "A local found these little ones behind a dumpster," Sarah said, gesturing to a pen where 4 kittens huddled together. "They're too young for adoption, but with proper care they'll be ready in a few weeks." June knelt beside the pen, her heart melting at their tiny faces. "I could take them," she heard herself say. "I have the space and the time." Sarah's face brightened. "That would be wonderful. We can provide everything you need: formula, bedding, even a heating pad." They spent the next hour reviewing care instructions and gathering supplies. June took careful notes, just as she had during her nursing days. The familiar feeling of purpose settled over her like a warm blanket. Back home, June transformed her sunroom into a kitten nursery. She arranged soft blankets in a large pen, set up the heating pad, and organized bottles and formula on a nearby table. Finn watched curiously from the doorway, while Pearl investigated each new item. Looking at her handiwork, June felt ready, really ready, for this new chapter. "I think we're ready for this," she said to Finn and Pearl. Finn's tail wagged gently, and Pearl's soft purr filled the quiet room. The evening sun painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks as June settled into her favorite porch chair. Finn sprawled contentedly at her feet, his gray muzzle resting on his paws. Pearl, now healthy and vibrant, purred softly in June's lap. Through the screen door, she could hear the playful scampering of the foster kittens, their tiny paws pattering across the wooden floors. June smiled as one of the kittens let out a high-pitched squeal of delight. The sound of life and joy filling her home no longer felt strange or overwhelming. Instead, it felt right, like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place. She ran her fingers through Pearl's soft fur, remembering the stormy night when Finn had led her to the tiny, shivering kitten. How scared she'd been then, not just for Pearl's survival, but of opening her heart again. The memory of finding Luna's collar and reading her husband's journal entries didn't sting like it used to. Instead, they felt like gentle reminders of the love that had shaped her life. Through the screen door, she watched the foster kittens tumble over each other, their energy seemingly endless. Pearl lifted her head occasionally, watching them with mild interest. Even Finn had grown accustomed to their presence, sometimes letting them climb over him when they were especially playful. "You'd love this," June whispered, thinking of her husband. She could almost hear his laugh, see the twinkle in his eye at the sight of all these animals making themselves at home. The thought brought a smile to her face, rather than tears to her eyes. Life had a funny way of coming full circle. The loss that had once threatened to overwhelm her had led her here, to a house full of purring, playing, loving creatures. Each tiny life she helped save felt like a tribute to her husband's memory, a continuation of his compassion. Finn lifted his head and gave a soft woof as one of the kittens pressed its tiny face against the screen door. Pearl jumped down from June's lap to investigate, touching noses with the kitten through the mesh. The sight made June's heart swell with affection. The setting sun cast long shadows across the porch as June stroked Finn's fur and watched Pearl interact with the kittens. "Thank you for saving me," she whispered to her faithful companions, her voice full of gratitude. Inside, the kittens continued their playful adventures, filling her home with the sounds of joy and new beginnings. If you enjoyed the story of June, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.